It is quite popular to characterise North Korea as the last communist state, a Stalinist relic of the Cold War. Certainly the country was created by the USSR following the end of World War II, and the state developed along the lines of many other communist states. It is hard to pinpoint when North Korea began to shift away from Marxist Leninism, and it is equally hard to determine if the North's ruling class ever took it seriously as a guiding ideology. What I am sure of is that today's North Korea certainly has no interest in it. Today's video is going to discuss why, focusing on three characteristics of the state: militarism, racial nationalism, and hereditary leadership. To start, North Korea functions as something close to a monarchy. The Kim family has ruled the country since at least the 1960s through a cult of personality, with Kim Il-sung at the center. In turn, he groomed his son to be his successor, which was successfully accomplished in the 1990s. Kim Jong-il ruled until his passing in the late 2000s, followed by his son, Kim Jong-un. While many communist countries were dictatorships, like the USSR or Mao's China, communist states shunned such hereditary leadership. In fact, Kim Il-sung's insistence on his son continuing his rule reportedly annoyed his allies in the CCP, and you can understand why. The cult of personality surrounding the Kim family also frustrated the post-Stalinist USSR. Some individual communists even considered a hereditary system to be akin to an absolute monarchy. No state in the communist world, to my knowledge, has ever had 3 generations of rulers from the same family. It is likely impossible for a North Korean to even imagine a future leader of the country that is not a Kim. Today, it is still a custom in the North to have 3 portraits in your home: that of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. The book Nothing to Envy even claims that it was a legal requirement in the 1990s. Militarism. North Korea is the most militarized nation on earth, with a mandatory service of 10 years for men. However, many men serve anywhere between 3 and 12. Because of this, North Korea has the 3rd largest army in the world, numbering 1.3 million active personnel and over 6 million in the reserves. This is out of a population size estimated at 26 million. Per capita, it is unrivaled in its size. Only the United States and China have largest militaries by total number. Since at least the 1990s, North Korea has followed a military-first policy, or first military, then labor policy. This has replaced their term juche in their propaganda messages. In other words, economic development has taken a backseat to militarization. Since the 2000s, Worker Party organizations in the North have abandoned discussing juche and instead have been ordered to speak of military-first politics. State media explained the term in April 2003 as follows. Quote, "The vitality of legitimacy of a political method lies in its firm guarantee of the autonomy of country, Nara, and race, Minjok. The race is above class and social stratum, the homeland above ideology and doctrine." In other words, the government should not base its legitimacy on economic development, but on propping up the military. Antagonizing their neighbors with their strength is a way for the government to show its legitimacy to its people. No other major communist power followed militarism to this degree. Economic development was how the USSR legitimized their rule. Industrialization and agricultural development was used in their propaganda, not racial militarism. Even if, of course, their defense budget was colossal. North Korea's emphasis on their military is closer to Prussian or Japanese militarism than their supposed socialist allies. Racial nationalism. Another way in which the North differs is the prominence of racial nationalism. B.R. Myers in The Cleanest Race, How North Koreans See Themselves and Why It Matters, argues that racial purity is central in the North's propaganda messages. Koreans are seen as the purest race in the world, not for any physical advantages, but for their childlike virtue. This race-based nationalism differs greatly from the state nationalism of the USSR or Yugoslavia. It is again closer to Japanese nationalism or Nazi Germany's. Racial purity is routinely defended in North Korean newspapers. For example, in response to a half South Korean, half American footballer being welcomed in the South, Northern journalists published the following, quote, "Monoethnicity is something that our nation and no other on earth can pride itself in. There is no suppressing the nation's shame and anger at the talk of a multiracial society which would dilute even the bloodline of our people." Again, this is not something a Soviet state newspaper would ever have published. Another example from 2013, which claimed to be the opinion of a North Korean laborer discussing Barack Obama, went as follows, quote, "Hideous monkey man, just looking at Obama's ugly mug turns my stomach almost to the point of vomiting. That blackish mug, the vacant, ash-colored eyes, the gaping nostrils. The more I study all this, the more he appears the spitting image of a monkey in an African jungle." The North was smart enough not to translate this into English, but published it online in Korean. The government is to some degree careful to hide the extremes of their racial views from outsiders. Still, their message routinely exudes race-based nationalism, especially since the end of the Cold War. So, what is North Korea? If North Korea has a guiding ideology, it is militarist ultranationalism. The combination of racial nationalism, militarism, and a succession system akin to an absolute monarchy all leads to the conclusion that the North is not a communist state. Arguably, it was in the 1940s and 50s, but increasingly less so in contemporary times. The state is more comparable to Imperial Japan or Nazi Germany than anything reminiscent of socialism. However, there are large caveats. The North does not show interest in expanding their borders to make an empire, beyond their threats to their southern neighbors, who they would certainly like to annex. This differs to the Japanese and Germans. Secondly, as Myers argues in his book, North Korean militarism is less strict than Imperial Japan's or Prussia. As North Koreans are seen as a people with childlike purity, they have some room to be spontaneous. The crushing suppression of emotion seen amongst Japanese militarists was not like this. Still, North Korea is certainly on the far right of the political map. If they were a communist in the past, they certainly are no longer. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. I'll see you next time.